Jeff the Shark is such an adorable little guy, but the best players know that he is secretly one of the strongest characters in the game. From pressuring the backline to just eliminating entire teams, Jeff is a force to be reckoned with. My name is Paz, an Eternity support player on the competitive ladder, and I'm going to tell you all of the things you actually need to know in order to pop off and carry on Jeff the Shark. Before we get started on his abilities, understand that if you go into playing Jeff the Shark to strictly heal your team, you're going to lose, as you are just playing him wrong. Jeff functions much more like a flanking DPS that applies constant pressure on the backline. The way that you win the game is by swimming into the enemy backline, pressuring supports by dealing as much damage as possible, and then pulling aggro from the enemy team so that the rest of your team can clean them up. The way you can do the bulk of your healing on Jeff is by displacing the attention and damage to you instead of the rest of your team. It might not show up on the scoreboard, but it does show up in the W at the end of the game. With this in mind, let's get into Jeff's kit. Starting off with his primary healing option, we have the Joyful Splash. Upon holding down left click by default, Jeff spits out a rapid fire projectile water beam that heals targets for 150 HP per second with a total ammo count of 100. It also goes through teammates, meaning you can heal multiple targets at a time in a straight line. Every second the beam is held down, it consumes 20 ammo, firing for a total of 5 seconds before having to reload. Because the beam is a projectile and it is not a hit scan beam, you'll have to lead your beam by a very slight amount at longer ranges. You also might have to heal the targets you will want to keep alive a little bit before they take damage, since the beam does take a little bit of time to reach its target. Other than that, the heal itself isn't really that complicated. It's the fact that you have to choose when to use it where it then becomes a little bit complicated. Most of the time, you are going to want to be doing damage, but there are specific times that you'll want to go back to healing. If you get forced off of your position and your team starts taking damage, you can fire the beam at your teammates in a line to farm ult charge pretty fast, allowing you to hard carry a little bit faster. In a less selfish light, if you have a teammate that is close to ult or is currently in their ult, it can occasionally be a good idea to drop what you are doing on the flank and make sure that the healing stays online to keep them alive and active. For example, if your Punisher decides that he wants to use his ultimate, it can sometimes be a good idea to pocket him through that so that he can actually shoot for longer and possibly find more picks. If they have a Hawkeye though that is just going to one-shot him anyway, it still is better for you to just eliminate the Hawkeye or at least apply pressure instead. Another example includes if your Luna is really close to ult but doesn't quite have it yet. If she gets dove, you'll want to make sure that you keep your healing beam on her so that she can live longer to possibly charge her ult to keep the rest of the team alive against important ultimates that they are specifically trying to dive her for. Outside of these niche situations, and when your team obviously needs healing, it is far better for you to default to applying pressure through damage. We will accomplish this objective through talking about his next firing mode, the Aqua Burst. Upon pressing right click by default, Jeff shoots out 12 water pellet projectiles before having to reload at a rate of a little less than 2 a second. Each pellet does 25 damage directly, and then an additional 40 damage in a splash damage spell field, totaling 65 damage per shot if the target is directly hit. Headshots do not count for this ability, so you will have to hit squishy targets 4 times in a row in the body to take them out, dealing 260 damage in 3.5 seconds if you care about the numbers. Because there is splash damage with the pellets, they do have fall off, not from the range that you're shooting from, but instead from where the pellet impacts on a surface. In a 3-meter radius around the splash, the targets around the pellet will be affected by half of the damage of the blast, so roughly 20 damage instead of the full 65, since the target is only being affected by the spell field in this situation. Outside of the nerdy math, the way you are going to hit more of these pellets is just like Loki or any other character that fires explosives. You'll want to aim around the enemy's legs so that even if you do miss the direct hit, you can at least guarantee some damage with the spell field splash. If the target you are shooting is flying near a wall, you can also just aim for the wall behind them to achieve the same effect. If that flyer is not around a wall though, it's probably better for you to just shoot another target and not waste your time. Shooting them in the air is simply just doing too much, and you're not going to hit enough of those shots to make it meaningful. The targets that you need to be focusing with your damage include supports and DPS. You definitely do not want to be shooting tanks. What is 65 damage a shot going to do to a Hulk? It's going to piss him off and send him your way. You don't want that because you're probably gonna die then. What you want is to send the enemy supports into a panic and possibly find a cheeky pick or force out an ultimate in the process. Before we move on from his damage though, it is appropriate to discuss Luna Snow's team up with Jeff right now, which allows him to fire icy pellets instead of boring water ones. Upon pressing X by default, Jeff will load up 12 icy pellets to fire every 30 seconds that boost the damage by an additional 5 per pellet, taking direct hits from 65 damage per shot to 70 damage per shot, meaning 4 shots is now enough to defeat 275 HP targets like Luna Snow, for example. These upgraded pellets stick around for 10 seconds. The splash radius also increases from 3 meters to 5 meters. What makes the pellets super strong, however, is the crowd control ability they receive, not just the damage. When an icy pellet makes contact with an enemy or the environment, it will also leave behind an icy residue that slows all enemies in a 5-meter radius around it by a pretty considerable amount. This makes it harder for the enemies to run away from your damage, making it more sticky and lethal as a result. What's super nice is that the ice sticks around for 3 seconds, which is a pretty considerable amount of time for a hero shooter. This means that even if you miss all of your shots on the enemy, you are still creating a slow death zone for your enemies that will make it easier for your teammates to clean up at the very least. Luna Snow is the character that makes Jeff such a menace right now, but we will talk a little bit more about that later. For now, let's talk about what keeps Jeff alive. Starting with his hide and seek ability, upon pressing shift, Jeff will dive into the ground where he moves 60% faster and heals himself for 35 HP per second. On top of this, when in the ground, Jeff can no longer be headshot and enjoys a much smaller hitbox since all the enemies can only see his little fin. In this form, Jeff can also swim around terrain like walls, kind of like how Rocket can climb on walls. Unlike Rocket though, Jeff can just sit on walls without moving to remain inconspicuous and dive on unsuspecting enemies that pass by. This is especially common on defense and is a blast to pull off. Personally though, I don't like having to hold the spacebar when I'm swimming around on walls. If you don't like how that feels either, you can switch that setting to tap here in the settings. This makes it much more comfortable for me to ambush my enemies, but at the end of the day, it's all just personal preference. It is really important that you get comfortable with swimming around as Jeff and constantly diving in and out of the ground, since it is the lifeline that keeps you alive. You want to use a bubble every 4 seconds, as that's when the speed boost fades away. There is no cooldown associated with stopping you from spamming the ability either. The only thing stopping you from staying in the ground forever is, well, doing damage and maybe even just healing your team, but also the fact that you can't contest the point while underground. Usually how you should use this ability is by putting a bubble down, running into it while diving, and then swimming super fast to your off angle. Then you apply pressure until the enemies retaliate, and then you do the same thing. Just put a bubble down and run away. Super simple. The technique is only as good as you are with the one ability though, so let's talk about those bubbles. Jeff can place healing bubbles on the ground for his teammates that, when made contact with, heal friendlies for 85 points of health immediately, while also giving them a 60% movement speed boost and increasing the healing they receive by 15% for 4 seconds. Jeff also gets a total of 6 of these bubbles. They stick on the ground for 3 minutes until they disappear, and each charge of a bubble has an individual cooldown of 6 seconds each. It is important to note though that only 5 bubbles are allowed to be on the field at a time. So how should you use these bubbles? Well, it depends on your situation. I always try to set up my friendly supports before I go on my flank by giving them 2 to 3 bubbles before I depart. This will give them the sustain they need in order to live while I go and shred the enemy backline. Since the bubbles have a 6-second cooldown, you will always have more than enough to sustain yourself so long as you position yourself on a safe but effective off angle. You can get to a safe angle by placing a bubble down, running into it, and then diving into the ground to move at crazy fast speeds. Notice how I don't stack bubbles though, because the speed boost does not stack, it only resets the buff duration. If you waste too many bubbles, you won't have them for later. It is really important that you have at least 1 to 2 for when you're doing damage, because you are going to need them if you get pressured out like you should. With good bubble management, a good Jeff should never die. Something you'll notice a lot though when you're playing Jeff is that sometimes it can be really difficult to confirm kills with your ultimate. While we will discuss how you should use your ultimate in more depth soon, you should always look to support yourself in completing your journey off the map with your bubbles. What this looks like is by placing a trail of bubbles where you intend to send the enemies off the map before the fight. This will give you the speed and health you need to make the journey even amidst the onslaught of damage the enemies will throw at you. Outside of this, you can also use the bubbles to knock enemies back a slight amount. I've seen this used to push enemies off the map, which is pretty funny, but to be honest, it never really happens and is not something I am consciously thinking about. It does come up if there's an Iron Fist diving your support. You can throw 2 bubbles and boop them back a little bit, but even that, it's not really going to change the game. The bubbles are like Jeff's version of Mantis packs that allow him to be aggressive and do damage while the team is also doing their own thing, but also are an essential tool to allow Jeff to dominate over the lobby, effectively making him immortal in the backline with the healing it provides plus the healing boost to his dive form. Seriously, if you play Jeff this way, Jeff is a tank. Alright, but before we cover his ultimate though, let's quickly discuss his passive, Oblivious Cuteness. I mean, come on, look at this guy. Besides making him a total heartbreaker, Jeff's passive also makes it so he takes 50% less damage from critical hits. This means that Hela does not 2-tap him anymore, just leaves him very low in HP. This is pretty nice, but realize that your head is the size of your body, so this is kind of necessary for the character to be even playable. Sorry to all the Jeff haters out there, but trust me, he needs this one. You can also manipulate your hitbox pretty hard, unlike other characters, by creating a figure 8 with your movement. This is what it should look like if you're doing it right. Let's finally talk about Jeff's ultimate though. It's Jeff. Upon pressing the ultimate, Jeff will dive into the ground and then create a prompt to eat any and all players within its 20-meter diameter, both friendlies and enemies. Even if they're 5 meters above the ground, they're getting eaten by Jeff. Once eaten, enemies take 25 damage per second over 6 seconds, meaning the ultimate does a total of 150 damage. But let's be honest, we all already know where this is going. You can eat enemies and then spit them off the map, eliminating them instantly. But if you want to be extra sure, you can also just take them off the map with you like you are Kirby in Super Smash Bros, which is low-key hilarious. Whether you want to spit them off the map or take them with you depends on the characters you gobble though, and how you spit them out. When you spit players out, they eventually regain control of their character, and if they have enough movement with their kits, they will come back and get their revenge, I promise you. Think about characters like Invisible Woman, Doctor Strange, Wolverine, or even Psylocke, to name a few. Sometimes though, if you can get a steep enough angle, it won't matter how much mobility they have, they're just cooked. Also, just remember, if you take enemies off the map, you can also take your friends off of the map too. Don't be that guy that just griefs the game, or better yet, go for a big Jeff ult on the point in overtime just to eat your whole team and lose the game because, well, no one's on the point anymore. It happens way too frequently. Because your ult is super lethal, it is also important to think about how the enemies will go out of their way to specifically counter your ultimate. First off, a good Magneto will always save his ultimate to absolutely slam you when you ult if given the chance. So it is important you either force out his bubble before going for a play or wait until he uses it on something else. Second, you can't actually eat everything. Some characters are impervious in their ults, like Emma Frost or Punisher, to name a few. And if Punisher sees you eat his whole team when he's ulting, you're cooked. Lastly, and arguably the best way to counter a Jeff ult is, well, to just split up if you're the enemy team. So the best way to confirm a big ult is to either eat fast or force an overtime fight on the point where the enemies have to fight instead of splitting up. Just be careful not to lose the game when you're going for this. Honestly, taking just 1 or 2 key targets out of the fight is more than enough to carry with it, especially if you were eating targets that have key ultimates in the upcoming fight, or don't want to try to risk eating more targets, putting you right in the middle of the enemy team when you really could position yourself eating 1 or 2 targets further away. That Groot and more that are looking to combo next fight, yeah, just eat the Groot and move on with your life. We've only talked about the ultimate in an aggressive manner though, and well, that's not the only case you'll want to use it in. Sometimes the best way to use a Jeff ult is to save your team from impending doom. What if you never got the chance to eat the Groot combo because you didn't get your ult fast enough? What you can do is try and eat your team right before the combo goes through to bypass the damage altogether. This does require specific timing though. This can also be used to counter mag ults, Iron Man ults, Hawkeye ults, you name it. While you might not eliminate the enemy team, sometimes your other support just trolls and they don't have their ultimate for a key moment when they need it, and you just need to get creative. Okay, but now that we understand all of the different uses to hitting an ult and how to hit it easier, there is one more thing that we have to learn: the infinite stall tech. Jeff's ultimate doesn't actually start until he submerges into the ground. It also means, however, that he can prolong his airtime in specific places. One place where he can do this is on Shin Shibuya's first point. He can jump on this roof and start his ult, wait for the enemies to come in, and then it's already too late. They are gobbled up and dead. They can't even kill you when you are doing this. You are invincible while stalling, by the way. Unfortunately, this map isn't in the competitive pool in Season 2.0, but when it does come back, it is a super fun spot to use that they haven't patched yet. I'm sure there's other spots to pull this off on other maps too. Now that we understand Jeff's kit thoroughly though, let's talk about what counters him. Outside of characters, the best way to beat a Jeff is to act like he isn't even there, at least in ranked. If the enemy supports peel for each other and there is not any other pressure on them, Jeff simply does not do enough damage to do anything. The other way you get countered on Jeff is by being overzealous on your flank too. While you do have a lot of self-healing abilities, you will stick around a whole lot less if you put yourself in easy to reach positions. The whole idea is that you want to bait the enemies as far away as possible from the fight, chasing you instead of your team. So characters that are pretty good about forcing you out early include Captain America that can keep up with you and make sure that your flank is null and void. Even more apparent though are DPS with a ton of mobility options. I really like playing Star-Lord into Jeff because his larger hitbox makes it easier to dump half a clip into him and then move on with my day. DPS with splash damage like Iron Man also do well into Jeff since it's nearly impossible to miss with his primary fire, and it's also hard to hit Iron Man out of the air as Jeff if you position correctly. Supports that are great into Jeff include Loki for the same reason. His explosive bolts make it really easy to deal with Jeff, and the runes take quite a while to break too. Moving on from counters to synergies, Jeff has two team-ups currently. One we've already talked about with Luna, but the other is with Groot. The same way that Rocket has his team-up. It's still really bad. You get on Groot's shoulder and can walk with him, making you a standstill hitbox, asking to die. The best thing you can do with this team-up is use it to strafe mid 1v1, making you impossible to hit. That's about it. But most of the time, you won't be sticking around your Groot anyways. Outside of team-ups, Jeff really likes to play with dive tanks like Captain America or Venom. While their damage standalone isn't great, with a Jeff added on, the combos make for some lethal damage that are impossible to play against. So much so that these combos are even finding playtime in pro matches. The DPS that Jeff frags out with the most is Johnny right now. Johnny does a great job pressuring supports from walking in, while Jeff does an excellent job of not letting supports get away. When you combine the two, the supports have nowhere to go and just crumble to all the pressure that this combo creates. Other dive DPS that also do well with Jeff right now include Black Panther and Iron Fist, since he shares a team up with Luna, but the Human Torch is for sure the standout pick right now in Season 2. The support that goes the best with Jeff though is without a doubt Luna Snow. The team up takes Jeff and makes him an absolute menace with more utility in his kit in the best ways possible. Outside of Luna, you can pair him with two other supports so that he doesn't have to worry about healing whatsoever and can purely focus on being a DPS, which is super handy if you were solid with the character. But now that we know how Jeff's kit works and the characters he likes and doesn't like to play against, let's review what we've learned through spectating some high-level VODs. All right, y'all, so for the first VOD and probably every single VOD we go over in this guide, we're going to be looking at Brush. He's a good friend of mine, great YouTuber. His stuff will be all in the description below. He plays a lot of Jeff, so he's a really good player to watch here if you really want to learn the higher ends of this character. But notice how right away, this guy wastes no time. He throws maybe a bubble back for his team, makes sure that no one's dying, and immediately goes to his off angle. He's immediately going to start doing damage and just pressuring the enemy team. He's not going to kill anyone, but he's going to pull aggro from that Moon Knight, and now he's going to get even more aggro from the rest of the team, but he isn't going to go into the point where he's going to find kills. He's only doing it enough to where he's going to get pressure off of his team and then onto him. And now when he's in this back line, again, he's not really going to be looking for kills. He's just looking to create a diversion of attention for this Namor. So he's going to break every single one of these deployables. He's constantly going to be pressuring out the entire enemy team. And then also on top of this, that annoying Hulk turret with Namor that you're always struggling with in ranked, Jeff does a great job of just flanking and not even having to deal with it. If you look at his composition, he also has 3 supports, so it really makes it so he never has to throw a healing bubble back at all. And that's why he can just create so much pressure, continue to take away so much attention to allow his team to find a pick on the Moon Knight and probably win this fight right thereafter. All right, so in this situation, Brush's team just won a fight. They got the point, but they got about halfway through the objective. There's going to be another fight. And I wanted to show you guys in these situations when he has ult, what is he doing with it? How is he going to set up for the next fight? And to my surprise, he immediately just does not care. He's just going to start pressuring the enemy team because he has so much mobility and so much self-sustain that, to be honest, he'll never die here. All he's doing is slowing down the enemy and making it harder for them to push. So because of all this pressure, they already killed the Groot. His Thor already killed the Groot. And now what he could do is he really could just play it safe. But instead, he doesn't care. He's going to be like, you know what? I'm going to make sure the Moon Knight with his ult doesn't even try to get into this point here, even though the Groot's already dead. He's like, imagine if the Groot wasn't dead here and he's just going for Moon Knight. He's going to take that combo completely out of the fight because of all this pressure. He's going to find the Moon Knight, which I find absolutely hilarious. And at this point, even if he dies, they're going to win this fight. They've already killed 3 people. All of that space that he's created, the diversion, and all of that attention that he's taking from the enemy team is winning him the game. So if you're going to just sit back and do nothing, that's all fine and good, but you should really just be playing Rocket or Loki or Luna Snow. If you're going to try to get aggressive and you want to really make an impact on the game, play Jeff like this. All right, y'all, and then for this last VOD review, I really wanted to show you guys how he goes about ulting, because it's something I actually didn't say about in the guide, but realize how everyone's on the point here. The Groot ult goes down, and he's always using it specifically when the enemies are going to use a support ult, because this is one of the only ults in the game that can secure a pick very consistently, just like that, when people are locked in a support ult. The Luna Snow cannot save that. She can't help damaging that. Honestly, Jeff might be one of the perfect counters and people to play with and against Luna Snow, which is really good. He does die here, but stuff like that is what's going to create value for his team. He gets 2 picks with that, or 1 pick with that, and that's going to then yield to 2 other picks, since now, if you look, they have no damage after he takes that person off the map. So really, using your Jeff ult when people are on the point, and like in overtime, that's always a good time too. But realistically, something that's going to be constantly used for is always look to use your Jeff ult when enemy supports ult. You're bound to get one, and if you can get an invisible woman or a cloak and dagger, you're just going to get insane amounts of value. So if you do all of these things that Brush has showed us today, I mean, you're gonna probably win a lot more games on the character, and make sure to check him out. I'll put all of his links in the description. And that closes out today's guide for Jeff the Shark and Marvel Rivals. If you have any questions, make sure to send them in the comments down below, as well as asking me live right here on YouTube or on Twitch at twitch.tv/PazSwagger. I stream every day I upload, so be sure to check me out to learn more about everything I talked about today. Thank you guys all so much for watching, but until next time, I've got to peace out and Paz out. I'll see you in the next one.